You'll never be real family, you're just the Mexican girl my son married. My mother-in-law said during Thanksgiving dinner. My husband stared down at his plate and said nothing. I smiled softly, gathered the empty serving bowls from the table, and walked into the kitchen before anyone could see my hands shaking. That night, after everyone left, I made one phone call. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes the people who try hardest to erase you are the very ones hiding the ugliest secrets. The dining room still smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon by the time I started washing dishes alone. Half-empty wine glasses sat scattered across the long oak table. Crumbs from pumpkin pie clung to folded napkins. Someone had left football playing softly on the living room television upstairs. But down in the kitchen, the house felt painfully quiet. I stood at the sink, staring at the reflection of warm yellow lights against the dark window above it. Outside, snow had started falling across the neighborhood. Inside, I felt farther from home than I had since leaving Mexico 20 years ago. My name is Elena Reyes Carter. I'm 62 years old, and for the past 11 years, I had spent every holiday trying to prove to my husband's family that I belonged there. Apparently, I had failed. Mom's old-fashioned, my husband Daniel always told me whenever his mother crossed the line. She doesn't mean anything by it. But people mean things. Especially when they repeat them for over a decade. At first, it had been small comments. Questions about whether my family came legally. Jokes about tacos during Christmas dinner. Her correcting my English pronunciation in front of guests, even though I'd been teaching bilingual third grade in Phoenix for nearly 20 years. Then came the comments about our children. You should only speak English in the house, she used to say whenever my daughter Sophia answered me in Spanish. The kids will get confused. Confused. As if half of who they were needed to be erased to make other people comfortable. I dried my hands slowly and glanced toward the staircase. Daniel was upstairs helping his mother pack leftovers into plastic containers to take home. He always did that after family dinners. He hovered around her nervously, trying to keep the peace between us like a little boy terrified of disappointing his mother. When we first met in college, Daniel loved everything about my culture. He loved the music my father played during backyard barbecues. He loved my mother's homemade tamales at Christmas. He even practiced Spanish for months just to ask my father for permission to marry me. Back then, I truly believed love was enough. I was wrong. The moment that broke something inside me happened less than an hour earlier. I had spent 2 full days cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey, cornbread stuffing, sweet potatoes, homemade flan, arroz rojo, fresh tortillas from scratch. I wanted both sides of our family traditions at the table. For a little while, everything almost felt normal. Then Sophia asked me in Spanish if I could pass the cranberry sauce. Before I could answer, Patricia, my mother-in-law, set down her wine glass with a sharp little click. We speak English in this family, she said coldly. The room went silent. Sophia looked down immediately. And then Patricia smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind women use when they want to humiliate you politely. You'll never be real family anyway, she said, dabbing her lips carefully with her napkin. You're just the Mexican girl my son married. I waited for Daniel to say something. Anything. But he only stared at his plate. That silence hurt more than her words. Because in that moment, I realized something terrible. After 11 years of marriage, I was still eating at their table like a guest waiting to be tolerated. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Patricia's voice again. You're just the Mexican girl my son married. Not wife. Not mother of her grandchildren. Not family. Just the Mexican girl. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs in my robe. The house was dark except for the soft kitchen light above the stove. Daniel had left half a slice of pie uncovered on the counter. And his mother's casserole dish was still sitting beside the sink waiting to be washed. Funny how she always brought empty dishes to Thanksgiving and left with full ones. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee and stood silently by the window. Phoenix nights get cold in November. The kind of cold that sneaks through old windows and settles into your bones. But the ache inside my chest felt heavier than the weather outside. Upstairs, Daniel was asleep. Or pretending to be. He never liked confrontation. That was one of the first things I learned about him back in college. Daniel could sit through an argument like a man trapped in a storm cellar, hoping the noise above him would eventually pass on its own. The problem was, storms don't disappear when you ignore them. Sometimes they destroy the whole house instead. By 7 that morning, I was already dressed for work. I taught 3rd grade at a bilingual elementary school 15 minutes from our neighborhood. Normally, my classroom felt like the safest place in my life. Children never cared about accents or last names. They cared whether you smiled at them when they were scared. Adults were different. Daniel came downstairs while I packed my lunch into my worn leather tote bag. "You left the bed," he said carefully. I nodded without looking at him. "Elena?" He sounded tired already, like my pain was another difficult situation he needed to manage before breakfast. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. I laughed softly at that. Not because it was funny. Because I had heard the same sentence for 11 years. When Patricia complained that my mother's tamales smelled too strong. When she told Sophia she looked prettier with lighter makeup because it made her less ethnic. When she asked our son Mateo if he planned on joining a gang someday because Mexican boys in Phoenix usually do. Every single time, Daniel said, "She didn't mean it." I zipped my bag shut slowly. "What exactly did she mean then?" I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "You know how Mom is." There it was. The excuse that protected her every single time. I finally looked at him then. Really looked at him. At 58, Daniel still had kind eyes. Still had the same nervous habit of tugging at his wedding ring when conversations became uncomfortable. I knew this man better than anyone on earth. And somehow, that made this hurt even worse. "She humiliated me in front of our children," I said. "She embarrassed herself," he replied quickly. "Not you." But that wasn't true. Humiliation spreads. It stains the whole room. Especially when nobody stops it. I slung my bag over my shoulder and reached for my car keys. "Elena, wait." I paused near the front door. "She's still my mother." The words settled heavily between us. Not once did he say, "You're my wife." I nodded slowly. "And I'm still the woman you promised to protect." For the first time all morning, Daniel had no response. I drove to work with tears burning behind my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. Morning traffic crawled across the freeway while Christmas ads already flashed across giant billboards above the city. Families smiling. Families hugging. Families pretending love was simple. At a red light, my phone buzzed inside my cup holder. A message from Patricia. I almost ignored it. But something in my chest tightened as I opened it. The text was only one sentence long. "You should teach those children English before they grow up confused like their mother." I stared at Patricia's message for almost the entire red light. Then the car behind me honked, and I realized traffic had already started moving. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I drove the rest of the way to school in silence. Confused like their mother. That sentence stayed with me all morning. Not because it surprised me. Patricia had been making comments like that for years. But this was the first time she'd said something so openly cruel directly to me. And somehow, I knew it wouldn't stop there. By the time I walked into my classroom, the halls were already buzzing with children's voices. Tiny backpacks bounced against little shoulders. Teachers carried coffee cups and stacks of worksheets. Somebody down the hall was hanging paper snowflakes for the upcoming Christmas program. Normal life kept moving forward, even when your own world felt cracked down the middle. "Buenos dias, Mrs. Carter," one of my students shouted happily the second he saw me. A few other children joined in immediately. "Buenos dias." I smiled automatically. "Good morning, sweetheart." Children always sensed sadness faster than adults did. By lunchtime, 3 different students had asked if I was tired. Maybe I was. Or maybe pain simply changes your face. During my lunch break, I sat alone in my classroom grading spelling tests while soft rain tapped against the windows. My phone buzzed twice beside my coffee cup. The first message was from Daniel. "Mom's just stressed lately. Please don't make this bigger than it is. I read it once. Then set the phone face down. The second message came from Sophia. Mom, are you okay? That one nearly broke me. My daughter was 27 years old now, married, living across town with her husband. But even as a little girl, Sophia had always watched everything carefully. She noticed tension before anyone spoke about it. Especially tension involving Patricia. I called her after school while sitting in my car. You don't have to call back if you're busy. She answered immediately. I just wanted to check on you. The concern in her voice made my throat tighten. I'm okay, I lied softly. There was a pause. Then Sophia sighed. She's getting worse, isn't she? I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The rain outside had turned heavier now, streaking across the windshield in uneven lines. She texted me this morning. I admitted. Another pause. What did she say? I almost repeated it word for word, but hearing those sentences out loud suddenly felt exhausting. The usual, I said quietly. Sophia let out a bitter little laugh. I hated hearing bitterness in my daughter's voice. She used to adore her grandmother once. Back before she understood the meaning behind Patricia's comments. Back when she thought everyone's family worked this way. You know what Mateo told me last month? Sophia asked suddenly. I frowned slightly. What? He said he stopped speaking Spanish at college because Grandma Patricia always made him feel embarrassed about it. Something inside my chest sank heavily. Mateo was only 20 years old. Smart, funny, sensitive like Daniel. When he was little, he used to climb onto my lap after school and beg me to tell him stories about Guadalajara. He loved hearing about my father's ranch and the street musicians downtown and the little bakery near my childhood church. He used to be proud of where he came from. Now he was hiding pieces of himself just to feel accepted. I sat there gripping my phone while rain pounded the roof of the car. And suddenly memories started lining up in my mind one after another. Patricia, accidentally, forgetting my mother's birthday every year. Correcting Mateo's Spanish grammar at family dinners even though she didn't speak Spanish herself. Buying Sophia blonde dolls every Christmas when my daughter clearly preferred dolls that looked like her. Little things. Tiny cuts. So small individually that Daniel could always excuse them. But together? Together they painted a very ugly picture. And for the first time in years, I stopped asking myself if I was overreacting. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. Patricia never wanted me to become part of the family. She wanted me to slowly disappear from it. That evening, I stopped at the grocery store before going home. Not because we needed anything. I just wasn't ready to walk back into that house yet. The holidays had already transformed the entire store. Artificial wreaths hung above every aisle. Christmas music played softly through ceiling speakers while exhausted parents pushed carts full of wrapping paper and frozen pies. Everything looked warm. Comforting. Normal. I stood in front of the produce section holding a bag of avocados longer than necessary. Trying to calm the heaviness in my chest. A young couple walked past me laughing in Spanish. The woman leaned into her husband's shoulder while he kissed the top of her head without embarrassment or hesitation. For a moment, I remembered Daniel and me at that age. 23 years old. Completely in love. Back then, he used to brag about my culture to everyone. He loved introducing me as the smartest woman on campus. He sat with my father for hours during family cookouts even when his Spanish was terrible. My mother cried the first time he danced with her during my cousin's wedding in El Paso because she said he looked at me like I was something precious. And honestly, for a long time, he did. When we got engaged, Patricia hugged me tightly at the restaurant and told me she was excited to finally have a daughter. I believed her. God, I was naive. The signs had already started back then. I just didn't understand them yet. At our wedding rehearsal dinner, Patricia joked that she hoped our future children would get Daniel's coloring. When Sophia was born with my dark curls and brown eyes, Patricia kept calling her exotic, like she was describing a vacation destination instead of a baby. And every year after that, the comments became sharper, smaller, more personal, always hidden carefully enough that Daniel could dismiss them. I paid for my groceries and walked back out into the cold evening air feeling strangely tired. When I pulled into the driveway, Patricia's car was still there. I sat frozen behind the steering wheel for several seconds. Then I saw Daniel standing in the kitchen window talking to her. Even from outside, I could tell he looked stressed. The same expression he always wore after trying to smooth things over between us. I walked inside quietly. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Patricia sat at the table wearing one of her expensive wool coats. Perfectly styled silver hair untouched by the wind outside. She looked completely comfortable in my house. "My goodness," she said the second she saw me. "You look exhausted." Not concern. Observation. I set my purse on the counter without answering. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Mom just came by to talk." Patricia folded her hands neatly together. "Elena, I think we both got emotional yesterday." Interesting choice. I opened the refrigerator slowly and started putting groceries away. "I wasn't emotional," I said calmly. Silence filled the kitchen. Patricia gave a soft little sigh like a disappointed teacher dealing with a difficult child. "You know," she said carefully, "sometimes people from different backgrounds misunderstand each other." Different backgrounds. That was how she always did it. Never outright hateful. Just polished enough to sound reasonable. I closed the refrigerator door and finally looked at her. "For 11 years, I said quietly, you've made comments about my accent, my family, my culture, my children, and my marriage." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside the table. Patricia blinked once. "I think you're being oversensitive." There it was again. The same word women like Patricia always used when they wanted to wound someone twice. First the insult. Then the denial that the insult even existed. I noticed Daniel staring at the floor instead of either of us. And suddenly, something became painfully clear to me. Patricia wasn't the only reason this family was broken. Daniel's silence had been feeding her for years. Patricia left an hour later. Not because the conversation ended. Because she decided it was over. That was always her way. She entered rooms like she owned them and left before anyone else had the chance to reclaim the air. Daniel walked her to the front door while I stayed in the kitchen wiping down counters that were already clean. I heard her soft voice near the entryway. "She's turning everything into racism now." Then quieter. "You need to be careful, Daniel. Women like her know how to manipulate guilt. Women like her." Even after 11 years of marriage, 2 children, and half a lifetime spent building a home with her son, I was still, women like her. The front door closed gently. Daniel stood there for several seconds before finally walking back into the kitchen. "She didn't mean that," he said immediately. I almost laughed again. It amazed me how quickly those words came to him now. Like breathing, like instinct. I folded the damp kitchen towel carefully over the sink divider. "Do you even hear yourself anymore?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked exhausted. His shoulders sagged as he leaned against the counter. "You want me to choose between my wife and my mother every single time something uncomfortable happens." Something uncomfortable. That was what he called humiliation now. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said the thing I had apparently been afraid to admit for years. "No, Daniel, I want you to notice when someone is hurting me." The room went completely silent after that. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us. Somewhere upstairs, the dryer buzzed to signal the end of a cycle. Ordinary household sounds, ordinary marriage sounds. But nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Daniel rubbed his wedding ring again. "I'm trying to keep this family together." I nodded slowly. "And I'm the only one being asked to shrink myself to make that happen." His eyes finally lifted toward mine then. For a second, I thought maybe he understood. Maybe after all these years, something had finally reached him. But then he sighed and said, "Mom grew up differently." There it was again. Another excuse carefully gift-wrapped as understanding. Patricia was 78 years old. According to Daniel, her generation explained everything. Her comments, her behavior, her cruelty. Funny how age only excused certain people. My immigrant parents were older than Patricia. They worked factory jobs their entire lives in Texas and still managed to treat people with kindness. My father barely spoke English when he died, but he never mocked someone else's accent to feel superior. Cruelty was not cultural. It was personal. I picked up my purse from the counter. "Where are you going?" Daniel asked. "To my sister's." His face tightened immediately. "Elena, don't do this. Do this." As if leaving for one night after years of disrespect was somehow extreme. "I need space." "You're overreacting." That word again. Something inside me finally went cold. Not angry. Not emotional. Just tired. Deeply tired. I walked toward the hallway closet for my coat when Daniel suddenly spoke again. "You know Mom worries about the kids." I stopped moving. Slowly, I turned back around. "What does that mean?" He hesitated too long. And in that hesitation, I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. "She thinks Sophia and Mateo have pulled away from the family because..." He swallowed hard. "Because you focused too much on your culture while they were growing up." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. I stared at my husband, the man who once danced to mariachi music barefoot in my parents' backyard, and felt something painful crack quietly inside my chest. "You mean their language?" I asked softly. Daniel looked miserable now. "I'm just saying maybe Mom thinks." "No," I interrupted calmly. "I know exactly what your mother thinks." And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I realized something even more frightening than Patricia's hatred. Daniel had started repeating it. I left the house 20 minutes later with an overnight bag and swollen eyes. Daniel pretended not to notice. Neither of us said goodbye. The drive to my sister Camilla's apartment took almost 40 minutes through evening traffic. Christmas lights already glowed across neighborhoods in soft red and gold blurs while radio stations played old holiday songs about family and home. I turned the radio off halfway there. Some nights silence hurts less. Camilla opened the door before I even knocked properly. One look at my face and she pulled me into her arms without asking questions. That's the thing about sisters. The good ones always know. Her apartment smelled like caldo simmering on the stove and cinnamon candles. Small, warm, lived in. Family photos covered the walls beside old framed pictures of our parents back in Texas. I suddenly realized how long it had been since I'd felt completely relaxed in someone else's home. "You finally fought with Patricia?" Camilla asked softly after handing me a bowl of soup. I sat at her tiny kitchen table and stared down at the steam rising from the broth. "No," I answered honestly. "I finally stopped pretending she loved me." Camilla didn't look surprised. That hurt more than I expected. "You knew?" I asked quietly. She gave me a tired little smile. "Elena, everybody knew." I looked up sharply. "Daniel knew too," she added carefully. I felt something heavy settle in my stomach. For years, Daniel had convinced me I was imagining things. Too sensitive, too emotional, misunderstanding his mother's intentions. But hearing my sister say everybody noticed it? That changed something. Camilla leaned back in her chair with a sigh. "Remember Sophia's baptism party?" I nodded slowly. Patricia had complained the entire afternoon because my parents spoke Spanish to relatives visiting from El Paso. She told Aunt Rosa your marriage probably wouldn't last because those cultures are too different. Camilla said quietly. I stared at her. "What?" Camilla frowned. "You seriously never heard about that?" No. I hadn't. Because people had been protecting me from Patricia for years without me even realizing it. Or maybe they were protecting the peace. Sometimes those become the same thing in families. Camilla stirred her tea slowly before speaking again. "She says ugly things when you leave rooms." The sentence landed softly. But it cut deep. I suddenly remembered all the times conversations stopped when I walked back into family gatherings. The strange silences, the awkward smiles, Daniel changing subjects too quickly. Not paranoia. Not oversensitivity. Patterns. "You know what the worst part is?" I whispered. Camilla waited quietly. I kept trying harder. My voice cracked slightly then. "I learned all Patricia's recipes. I hosted every holiday. I sent birthday cards. I invited her on vacations. I spent 11 years trying to prove I was good enough for that family." Camilla reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were never the problem." Tears finally burned behind my eyes again. But this time I let them come. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just exhausted tears from a woman who suddenly realized she'd spent years begging quietly for acceptance from people who had already made their decision about her. After dinner, Camilla handed me one of her oversized sweaters and we sat together on the couch watching some terrible Christmas movie neither of us cared about. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Elena, he said immediately, sounding tense. Mom's upset. I closed my eyes slowly. Of course she was. Patricia always became the victim the second someone stopped tolerating her behavior. I'm tired, Daniel. She thinks you're turning the kids against her. I almost laughed at the absurdity of that. Sophia and Mateo were adults now. They had eyes, ears, memories. People like Patricia always assumed children stayed blind forever. Then Daniel said something that made my entire body go still. Mom said she found some things in your office earlier. My grip tightened around the phone. What things? There was a pause. Then quietly, Daniel said. She said you've been keeping records of her messages. I sat up slowly on Camilla's couch. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood Daniel. What do you mean she found them? Daniel exhaled heavily into the phone. She stopped by this afternoon after you left. She said she was trying to help clean up and found a folder in your office drawer. My stomach tightened immediately. The folder. I had started keeping screenshots almost 3 years earlier. At first, I told myself it was only because Patricia constantly denied the things she said. Every cruel text somehow became a misunderstanding later. Every insult turned into me being too emotional. So I started saving them. Not for revenge. For sanity. A screenshot of Patricia texting Sophia, "You'd look prettier with lighter hair." A photo of the Christmas card she sent where everyone's names were printed correctly except mine. Mine simply said, Daniel's wife. Messages about, those people flooding Arizona. Comments about bilingual education, holding children back. Little pieces of poison collected quietly over time. Daniel lowered his voice. She thinks you're building some kind of case against her. I looked over at Camilla, who was silently watching my expression from the kitchen doorway. A case. Interesting word. I wasn't hiding anything, I said calmly. Then why keep all of it? Because nobody believed me. But I was suddenly too tired to explain that. Instead, I asked, why was your mother going through my office? Silence. That silence answered everything. She was worried about you. Daniel finally muttered. No. Patricia wasn't worried. Patricia was searching. And somehow that frightened me more than her insults ever had. After we hung up, Camilla sat beside me on the couch holding 2 mugs of tea. She went through your drawers? She asked quietly. I nodded. Camilla's face hardened immediately. That's not normal, Elena. No. It wasn't. I stared down at my tea without drinking it. Then suddenly another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, I had come home from work and found Patricia inside my bedroom folding laundry. She claimed she was trying to help, but I remembered feeling uncomfortable even then. One of my jewelry boxes had been slightly out of place afterward. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Now I wasn't so sure. Daniel gave her a key years ago. I whispered. Camilla blinked. To your house? I nodded again. Emergency purposes, I said bitterly. But emergencies apparently included searching through my office while I wasn't home. A cold feeling slowly spread through my chest. Not panic. Awareness. That was the frightening thing about finally seeing people clearly. Once the illusion disappeared, old memories started rearranging themselves into something uglier. Suddenly Patricia's behavior didn't feel random anymore. It felt deliberate. Controlled. Careful. Camilla reached for the remote and muted the television completely. Elena, she said softly, has Daniel ever defended you when she wasn't around? I opened my mouth to answer. Then stopped. Because honestly, I couldn't remember. He comforted me privately sometimes. Apologized, smoothed things over afterward, asked me not to take things personally. But actual defense? Real boundaries? No. The realization settled heavily over me. For years, Daniel had acted less like a husband and more like a translator between me and his mother. As if both sides simply spoke different emotional languages. But racism didn't need translation. Humiliation didn't either. My phone buzzed again on the coffee table. Another message from Daniel. Mom thinks we should all sit down together tomorrow and clear the air. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then another message appeared. Please don't embarrass her by bringing up old texts. Embarrass her. That part almost made me smile. Because apparently Patricia could humiliate me for 11 years in front of family, friends, even my own children. But showing proof of it? That would be unacceptable. And for the first time in a very long time, I stopped worrying about keeping everyone comfortable. Especially the people who never cared about my comfort at all. I barely slept that night at Camilla's apartment. Every time I started drifting off, another memory surfaced. Patricia standing too close behind me in my own kitchen while criticizing the way I cooked. Patricia laughing when Mateo pronounced a Spanish word incorrectly. Patricia telling Sophia at 14 that American boys prefer girls who look polished. At the time, each comment felt isolated, manageable. Now they felt connected. Like beads finally sliding onto the same string. Around 6 in the morning, I walked quietly into Camilla's kitchen and opened my phone again. Daniel had sent 3 more messages overnight. Mom's heartbroken. You know she comes from a different generation. Please don't make today harder than it needs to be. I stared at those messages while the coffee maker gurgled softly beside me. Not once had he written, I'm sorry she hurt you. Not once had he asked, are you okay? Everything centered around Patricia's feelings. Patricia's comfort. Patricia's reputation. I suddenly wondered how many years I had spent disappearing inside that dynamic without even noticing it. Camilla walked in wearing fuzzy slippers and one of my father's old college sweatshirts she'd stolen decades ago. You're thinking too loud again, she said gently. I smiled weakly over my coffee mug. I don't know what I'm supposed to do today. Camilla leaned against the counter. Do you want honesty? I nodded. You stop protecting people who never protected you. Simple sentence. Heavy truth. Around noon, I finally drove home. The neighborhood looked painfully normal. Kids rode bicycles down the sidewalk. Somebody nearby was hanging Christmas lights across their roof. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Meanwhile, my stomach felt tight the closer I got to the driveway. Patricia's car was already there. Of course it was. I sat in my car for almost a full minute before walking inside. The atmosphere in the house felt strange immediately. Too quiet. Too prepared. Daniel stood near the dining room table looking tense. Patricia sat perfectly upright beside him wearing cream-colored slacks and a pearl necklace like she was attending a church meeting instead of confronting her daughter-in-law. And then I noticed something else. A folder. My folder. Sitting directly in front of Patricia. My chest went cold. She rested one manicured hand on top of it calmly. Elena, she said softly, we need to talk about this unhealthy fixation you've developed. Fixation. Interesting word for evidence. I removed my coat slowly and hung it near the door before answering. You went through my private things. Patricia gave a patient little smile. I was concerned. Daniel stepped in quickly. Mom thinks maybe everybody's gotten too sensitive lately. Everybody. Funny how people always hide behind group language when they know they're wrong individually. I pulled out a chair across from them and sat down quietly. For the first time in years, I wasn't nervous around Patricia. I was watching her. Really watching her. The controlled voice. The careful posture. The polished victim performance. She opened the folder delicately. Inside were printed screenshots, notes, dates. Years of them. You kept records of family conversations. Patricia said, that's extremely disturbing. Family conversations. Not racist comments. Not humiliation. Not cruelty. Just conversations. I looked directly at Daniel. You read them? His face flushed immediately. Elena? That answer was enough. He had read them. He had seen every message. Every insult. Every degrading little comment his mother denied saying. And somehow he was still sitting beside her. Protecting her. Patricia folded her hands neatly together. I think, she said softly, you've spent too much time teaching children victim mentality. There it was. Not subtle anymore. Not polished enough to hide. Something inside me became very calm then. Because for the first time, Patricia stopped pretending. And once people finally show you exactly who they are, you stop feeling confused. The room stayed quiet for several seconds after Patricia's comment. Daniel looked uncomfortable immediately. He always looked uncomfortable once his mother pushed things too far too openly. Like part of him recognized the ugliness, even while another part kept trying to protect it. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. You think teaching children to respect where they come from is victim mentality? Patricia tilted her head slightly. I think constantly focusing on race creates division. There it was again. That polished tone. That carefully rehearsed superiority. People like Patricia loved saying cruel things in calm voices because they believed composure made them right. I noticed Daniel watching me carefully now, probably waiting for me to become emotional, waiting for tears or anger so the conversation could turn into, see? She's unstable. But something strange had happened inside me over the last 24 hours. I wasn't trying to convince them anymore. And that changed everything. I reached forward slowly and opened the folder myself. Page after page of screenshots slid across the table. Texts. Dates. Comments. Proof. Patricia's expression tightened slightly for the first time. Not guilt. Annoyance. Like she resented being documented. I pulled out one screenshot and read it aloud calmly. Maybe if Elena spoke proper English at home, the kids would act more American. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Patricia crossed her arms. That was taken out of context. I grabbed another one. I worry Mateo will struggle professionally if he keeps using that accent around educated people. Then another. Sophia would be prettier without those harsh dark features. Daniel finally spoke. Mom? But Patricia kept going. I was trying to help those children succeed. Help. Funny word for shame. I looked directly at her. You spent years teaching my children that half of who they are should be hidden. Her jaw tightened. I taught them how the real world works. No, I said quietly. You taught them they needed your approval to feel worthy. The silence after that felt heavy. Not dramatic. Just honest. Daniel suddenly stood from the table and walked toward the kitchen window, rubbing both hands over his face. I can't do this, he muttered. And there it was. The same escape route he'd used for years. When conversations became painful, Daniel disappeared emotionally first. Patricia looked toward him immediately. See, she said softly to me. This is exactly what I meant. You create conflict everywhere you go. I almost smiled at that. Because for the first time, her manipulation looked obvious instead of confusing. Like seeing cheap stage makeup under bright lights. No, I answered calmly. The conflict was always here. I just stopped pretending not to see it. That landed harder than yelling ever could have. Patricia's face changed slightly then. Something colder surfaced underneath the polished grandmother routine. You know, she said carefully, families survive by adapting. My son adapted, my grandchildren adapted, but you. She paused deliberately. You never fully assimilated. Assimilated. The word hung in the air like smoke. Not integrated. Not connected. Assimilated. As if loving my culture somehow threatened hers. I heard movement behind me then. The front door opening. A familiar voice calling out, Mom? Sophia. A second later Mateo walked in behind her. Both of my children stopped immediately when they saw the tension at the dining room table. Mateo's eyes moved from Patricia, to the folder, to my face. Then quietly, he asked, What's going on? Nobody answered right away. Because suddenly the truth wasn't trapped in whispers anymore. Now it was sitting in the middle of the table where everyone could finally see it. Sophia was the first to move. She stepped closer to the table slowly, her eyes scanning the printed screenshots spread across the wood surface. Mateo followed behind her, taller than his father now, broad shoulders tense beneath his gray hoodie. Neither of my children looked confused. They looked tired, And somehow, that hurt me more. What is all this? Sophia asked quietly. Patricia straightened immediately in her chair. Your mother has been collecting private family conversations. Private family conversations. The phrase sounded almost ridiculous now. Mateo picked up one of the pages before anyone could stop him. I watched his eyes move across the text. Then his jaw tightened. Oh my God, he whispered. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Mateo, it's complicated. No, Mateo said sharply. Actually, it's not. The room went still. I don't think Patricia expected resistance from him. She always treated Mateo differently than Sophia. Softer, more carefully, probably because he looked more like Daniel physically. But Mateo had inherited my memory. And my silence. Which meant he noticed everything. Sophia slowly lowered herself into the chair beside me and picked up another screenshot. I recognized that one immediately. It was from 3 years earlier after Sophia posted photos from a Dia de los Muertos celebration downtown. Patricia had texted me, "Do you really think future employers want to see things like this online?" Sophia stared at the message for several long seconds. Then she looked directly at her grandmother. You said this? Patricia gave a small defensive shrug. I was trying to protect your image. No, Sophia answered quietly. You were embarrassed by us. Daniel rubbed his forehead hard. Can everybody please calm down? But nobody was yelling. That was the strange part. The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply removes all the excuses from the room. Mateo suddenly laughed once under his breath. Not happy. Disappointed. You know, he said while shaking his head slowly. I stopped speaking Spanish at college because of you. Patricia blinked. What? I thought people would respect me more if I sounded less Mexican. The sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. Because I remembered the little boy who used to sing ranchera songs in the backseat of my car. The little boy who once corrected his elementary school teacher for pronouncing our last name wrong. That confidence had disappeared slowly over the years. And I had blamed society. School. Social pressure. But Patricia had been sitting inside that damage the entire time. Daniel looked shaken now too. Mateo? His son turned toward him immediately. You knew she talked like this. Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it again. And in that silence, both of my children finally saw what I had been seeing for years. Their father wasn't blind. He was passive. There's a difference. Patricia's composure finally started cracking around the edges. I think everyone is becoming very dramatic, she said tightly. I gave this family everything. I looked at her calmly. No, I said softly, you gave this family conditions. Love us your way. Speak your way. Act your way. Hide the rest. Sophia reached over and quietly took my hand under the table. Such a small gesture. But after years of feeling alone in that house, it nearly made me cry. Patricia noticed it too. And for the first time since I met her, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Not superiority. Not irritation. Fear. Because control only works while people stay divided. And her family was finally starting to compare memories out loud. Nobody spoke for a while after that. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the dining room table, falling over the scattered screenshots and half-finished coffee cups like evidence after a storm. Patricia sat unusually still now. The confident rhythm in her voice had disappeared. Not because she felt guilty. Because she was losing control of the narrative. People like Patricia survive by separating people emotionally. One child at a time. One insecurity at a time. One silence at a time. But once everyone starts comparing experiences together, the mask slips quickly. Mateo sat down heavily across from me, rubbing both hands over his face. I honestly thought something was wrong with me growing up, he admitted quietly. My chest tightened immediately. What do you mean? He stared down at the table. In high school, Grandma kept correcting the way I talked around her friends. He gave a humorless laugh. I started recording myself speaking before presentations because I thought I sounded too Mexican. The sentence shattered something inside me. I remembered how quiet Mateo became around 16. How he stopped answering me in Spanish when his friends visited the house. How he suddenly asked for contact lenses even though he looked handsome in glasses. I thought it was teenage insecurity. Now I understood where some of it came from. Sophia wiped tears from her eyes angrily. She used to tell me my hair looked messy when I wore it natural. Patricia immediately straightened again. I was trying to help you look professional. No, Sophia said sharply, you wanted me to look whiter. Daniel finally sat down at the table then, looking older than I had ever seen him. Tired. Cornered. Ashamed. And maybe for the first time in our marriage, unable to hide behind the word misunderstanding. I didn't realize it was this bad, he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then answered honestly. You realized enough to stay silent. That hurt him. I could see it immediately. But some truths arrive late because they've been protected for too long. Patricia suddenly pushed her chair back. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked by my own family. Family. Interesting word now. Mateo looked up at her calmly. Do you even hear yourself, Grandma? She froze. You spent years making Mom feel like she didn't belong here, he continued quietly, and somehow you still think you're the victim. Patricia's face hardened immediately. I sacrificed everything for this family. No, Sophia whispered, Mom did. Silence. Heavy silence. Because everyone at that table knew it was true. I thought about every Thanksgiving dinner I cooked alone. Every Christmas morning I woke up before sunrise wrapping gifts. Every school event. Every doctor appointment. Every holiday where I smiled through humiliation just to keep peace for everyone else. Patricia wanted admiration. But I had done the actual work of loving this family. And deep down, everyone knew it. Patricia grabbed her purse abruptly. This conversation is disgusting. Then she looked directly at Daniel. You're seriously going to let them speak to me this way? Them. Not your wife. Not your children. Them. Daniel looked at his mother quietly for several long seconds. And finally, for the first time in 11 years, he didn't rush to rescue her. Instead, he asked one simple question. Mom, why did you hate Elena so much? The room went completely still. Patricia opened her mouth immediately. Then stopped. Because hatred becomes harder to disguise once someone finally says its name out loud. And for the first time since I met her, Patricia looked small. Patricia left our house without another word that evening. The front door closed softly behind her. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just quiet. And somehow, that silence felt heavier than all the arguments before it. Daniel stood near the dining room window for a long time after she drove away. The sky outside had already turned dark, and Christmas lights from neighboring houses blinked softly across the street. Nobody moved right away. The entire room felt exhausted. Not from fighting. From finally telling the truth. Mateo slowly gathered the scattered screenshots into a neat pile while Sophia carried untouched coffee cups back into the kitchen. Ordinary little movements. Family movements. For the first time in years, nobody was pretending everything was okay. And strangely enough, that felt healthier than the pretending ever did. Daniel finally looked at me. I don't know how I missed all of this, he admitted quietly. I did not answer immediately. Because honestly, part of me was still angry. But another part of me understood something painful about people like Daniel. Silence becomes a habit. If someone spends their whole life avoiding conflict, eventually they stop recognizing cruelty unless it's screaming directly into their face. Patricia had never screamed. She whispered. She smiled. She humiliated softly. And Daniel spent years confusing quietness with kindness. I kept waiting for you to choose us, I said gently. His eyes filled immediately. I thought keeping the peace was protecting the family. No, Sophia said softly from the kitchen doorway. Keeping secrets protected Grandma. That sentence settled over all of us. Because it was true. Families don't break from honesty. They break from years of silence around the wrong things. A week later, Daniel changed the locks on the house. He did it quietly on a Saturday morning while I graded papers at the dining room table. No speech. No announcement. Just action. Later that afternoon, he handed me the new spare key first. Such a small moment. But after years of feeling like a guest in my own home, it mattered more than he probably realized. Things did not magically become perfect after that. Real healing never works like movie endings. Daniel started therapy a month later. Mateo slowly began speaking Spanish again during family dinners. Sophia stopped straightening her curls every morning. Little things. Small returns to themselves. As for Patricia, she called less and less after people stopped excusing her behavior. Funny how manipulation weakens once it no longer happens in private. The biggest surprise came the following Christmas. Usually, I hosted everyone, cooked everything, managed everything. That year, I almost canceled the holiday entirely. But on Christmas Eve morning, Sophia arrived carrying homemade tamales. Mateo brought pan dulce from a Mexican bakery across town. Daniel hung lights across the backyard himself while old ranchera music played softly from the kitchen speaker. For the first time in years, nobody asked us to shrink ourselves to make someone else comfortable. And that changed the entire feeling of the house. At one point during dinner, Mateo looked around the table and smiled. This actually feels peaceful now. Peaceful. Not perfect. Not fake. Just honest. Later that night, after everyone went home, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the leftover tamales cooling beside the stove. The same kitchen where I once stood crying quietly after Thanksgiving dinner. Same woman. Same house. Different understanding. I used to think being accepted meant becoming smaller, quieter, easier for other people to digest. Now I know real family works differently. Real family does not ask you to erase your language, your history, your face, or your name to earn love. And if someone only loves the version of you that disappears, that was never love to begin with.